Welcome back. My name is Devalila, and this is Nayaswami Devarshi. We'll be carrying on, discussing more this beautiful and inspiring book, Kriya Yoga, Spiritual Awakening for the New Age. Devarshi, what is meant when it's said the art and the science of Kriya Yoga? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a very important question to really understanding how to gain results from a practice, any spiritual practice, but a practice like Kriya Yoga. Sometimes people think it's all just about techniques, and it's not just about techniques. It's not mechanical in the way we do these things. The Kriya technique itself works with the physical breath, but it also works with devotion. It works with, as we were talking about, transmuting human feeling into divine feeling, working with just the inner life force, and it works with intuition and more of an intuitive awareness of these energies. So it's not just technique, it's both science and it's art. Now, you can, and I'll use an example, and Swami Kriyananda uses this analogy very often talking about Kriya Yoga, that many people go to art school and they learn all the techniques of art, how to use the brush, how to work with color, the science of color, and how to do all these things. But not many people come out of art school who become brilliant and even great inspired artists. Because those who are really truly inspired, it's much more than technique. It's working with this, again, intuitive understanding, working with inspiration, working with divine feeling, or in the case of art, sometimes it's not divine feeling, it's more human emotion that's being expressed. So it's not just a matter of learning techniques. Too many yogis think it's just about doing techniques and then I'll become spiritual. And Yogananda, in the very introduction to this book, he tells the story, or I share the story of him from his autobiography of a yogi. And he was a teenager at that time. His name was Mukunda, before he became Yogananda. And he was meditating with a great saint, a great Kriya Yogi, disciple of this line of Kriya masters. And this young Mukunda would go and meditate with the saint who was called the levitating saint in that book. And they finished an hour or two of sitting in meditation. And the saint gently chided the young Yogananda, Mukunda, and he told him, he said, you often go into the silence, when we do this, but are you actually having anubhav, which is a Sanskrit word for having the direct perception of God? And he chided the young Mukunda, do not mistake the techniques for the goal. And so it's not just about doing techniques. It's about seeing the techniques and the tools of Kriya Yoga as tools to help us have the divine experience. And in order to do that, we also have to understand the art behind the science and how the art and the science work together. And in many ways, this entire book, there's a chapter on combining art and science in the book in terms of Kriya Yoga. But in many ways, the entire book weaves art and science throughout the book together because they are woven together. It's not learning technique in one place and then learning the art of it in another place. It's about learning, as I was saying in our previous talk, about how even during meditation and even while practicing techniques, including the Kriya technique, it's learning how to even offer up human emotions during meditation and combining it with the technique. And this is not something that's just intellectual or mechanical. It requires us to really work with intuitive feeling and intuitive awareness. And I share in the book a musician that I heard, practicing or performing music very beautifully. And you'll see this with great musicians. I know an Ananda friend who's a great cellist, and he's a master at that instrument. He teaches it, he plays in orchestras. And when he plays that instrument, you can see that his technique is flawless. And I imagine he still practices every day the finger exercises with that instrument. But the technique is so natural that it's become just a tool, a vehicle for him to be able to express divine feeling in the way that he plays the music. And so each song has a particular mood and feeling. And because he doesn't have to concentrate just on technique, this human feeling and inspiration just flows very naturally through his instrument. And so techniques help us to be able to channel, to feel, and to control and work with the divine feeling. And this is the combination of science and art, of technique and feeling. And you can see this, again, another musician, I heard them say that his music teacher used to tell him, he said, don't let bad technique get in the way of good music. And so technique is important also. And so really the whole path of Kriya Yoga is how you merge these two together and work with both of them together. And then the technique does not just become the whole point and purpose of it. We are working with technique, with art, with inspiration, all together as one. And I share a quote even from Einstein in the book, where Einstein himself, he said, just scientific knowledge alone will not get one to the inspiration of new theories in science. It also requires intuition. Yogananda, he described intuition as when the feelings of the heart, the human emotions, are calmed, and it's a way of perceiving from the heart. So it's more heart perception rather than mental brain perception. And this is how we work with an intuitive, feeling-based awareness and understanding. And when it's combined with technique, there's an extraordinary power. Yogananda, he said about Kriya Yoga, he said, Kriya Yoga plus devotion works like mathematics. It cannot fail. But it requires both of them together. Swami Kriyananda, near the end of his life, after practicing Kriya Yoga for some 60 years or more, he said, every Kriya I see now, every practice of the individual technique should be an act of devotional self-offering. And so this is a way of working with technique, but not just as a mechanical huffing and puffing of the lungs, but working with divine feeling and self-offering while doing the technique. And the technique, as we were talking earlier, gives us control over the life force. It helps us to calm the agitated emotions and really turn agitated feeling into divine, uplifted feeling. And that's the beauty of this whole approach to Kriya Yoga that Yogananda taught and that we share in this book, is that it's a whole approach to life, it's a whole way to life, and it doesn't separate technique and science from art, feeling, from devotional, spiritual, religious aspiration. It all works together. One way to look at how these things work together, I was in Assisi, Italy, and I was with some friends, some Ananda monks, and we were visiting the shrines of St. Francis of Assisi. And Yogananda, he loved St. Francis. He called him his patron saint. And he himself visited those places in Assisi. And we were visiting one of the holy places associated with the saint's life. And there were some of our young Ananda monks were there, and we were practicing meditation and tuning in inwardly at those sacred places. And a nun came up, and she was very curious about us. This was a Franciscan nun. And she was very open-minded. And she asked us, who are you? What are you people doing? Because she could see that we were out of the ordinary and that we were meditating at those places. We told her that we practice meditation and that we see meditation as a way of communing with the divine in that deep stillness and in that uplifted place of the heart when you get very still and you meditate. And she got very excited, and she said she was very eager. And one of our people just gave a very simple explanation. He said that, for example, if when you sit to pray and meditate, if you're all slouched over and slumped over, you'll just be low energy, your mind will be dull. And so the practice of yoga and meditation teaches us the technique, very simple, of sitting upright, shoulders back, chest out, with a very straight spine. Because when we do that, the energy rises more freely upwards. And this nun was so excited to hear that. She said, that's exactly what I tell my sister nuns. I tell them, you have to sit up straight when you pray, otherwise you're just going to fall asleep. And I see you falling asleep when you pray. Sit up straight. And so the science of Kriya is very practical. It's really very simple. It works with universal, realities that are true of all human beings. And sitting with a straight spine is one, but some get a little bit more deep than that, and maybe a little more esoteric than that, but also very practical. Same with the eyes, the gaze, looking upwards. When we sit and pray and meditate with that position, we feel more uplifted. The energy is rising. And so Kriya, science and art, this is the science of very simple human realities that are universal to everyone, and the art of using those tools, those techniques, those practices to turn our feeling energy up towards the divine, towards God, and as Yogananda shared in his autobiography, of helping us to have the direct perception and the direct experience of God in meditation in our own selves, with just in that very simple stillness and grace that comes when we get into these meditative states that are also uplifted and working with, again, with feeling awareness, with mental awareness, and again, science and art, technique and devotional feeling.
Thank you, Devarshi. You mentioned in meditation it's communing with the divine. Is there something more to Kriya Yoga than just our own self-effort? Like how does this work with communing with the divine?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because we've seen that we don't do this all by ourselves. In a way, what we're doing is that prayer and meditation, we are tuning into the divine. We are tuning into God. Whatever way you relate to God, there's a power and an energy and a strength that's just much greater than our own. Swami Kriyananda talked about this, and again, there's a chapter in the book that talks about how true spiritual practices and techniques are a way of cooperating with grace. And again, this is referring to the art and the science. What this means, cooperating with grace, is that, as I was just saying a minute ago, when we sit up straight, raise our eyes, look upwards, we start to raise the energy and we start to feel uplifted. At the same time, we're tuning in to a divine flow of energy within ourselves, and we're cooperating with doing the right actions, the right practices that cooperate with an energy that's already here within ourselves. So we're not creating a new energy within ourselves. We're cooperating with these natural flows of energy that really want to aspire, to lift upwards. And when you tune into that energy, you are carried along on that energy, which is divine grace. And some people teach that divine grace is just something that's just given to us. Passively, we wait for it and it comes. Some people teach the opposite, that only by self-effort do we ever become free, and it all depends on our own heroic efforts. But really, it's a cooperation with God, with the saints also. There's an analogy used by a great Indian saint, and it's shared in the book also, where cooperating with grace is very much like someone who, trying to use self-effort, walks along the banks of a river and tries to make progress by wading through the mud, through the thickets, through the brambles, through the trees, and going along the side of the river and trying to make progress just with their own effort. Cooperating with grace, the analogy here, is that you go out into the river and you have to put out the effort to go out into the river. It's not passive. You wade through the mud. You have to swim out to the river a little bit. But when you get out to the center of the river, there's a very strong current flowing downstream. And you go into that strong central current, and then your efforts end, or they don't really end. They take you to the point where you're caught in this very strong, powerful current of divine grace, is what we're talking about really in meditation. And our part is to do everything we can with practices, with techniques, to enter into that flow of grace and to cooperate with it and work with it. This also means, of course, that in our daily lives, we can't just sit in meditation and be really spiritual in meditation and then go out during the day and be mean to people and be rude and be an awful human being, because in a way we're defeating that efforts that we make by not cooperating. It's pretending that all we have to do is go to church and we'll be saved and we'll be freed and we'll be spiritual, when it's a whole way of life again. And so cooperating with grace also means acting in saint-like ways if we can, even if it's just not a pretense, but even if we have to make the effort to be good and the effort to be kind. We find that just simply by actively and proactively being kind to others, for example, during the day, that also gets us into this flow of divine grace. And over time, if we do it in the right way, with a conscious awareness that it's not just our own kindness, but in a way it's divine kindness that we're working with and that is flowing through us, then it makes it easier. And this is why Yogananda, he said that with practice like Kriya Yoga, that yes, it does take effort. We have to use willpower. We have to use some discipline. But that when we do it in the right way of cooperating with this grace, then as he put it, your efforts end in ease. And that's when you put out the effort in a single meditation or throughout life to get to that central current in the river where we are carried very quickly towards the divine ocean of divine understanding. And so this is this idea of cooperating with grace. It also works with cooperating with the divine teacher and guide. And in India, this is called the guru. And this is really also part of the path of Kriya Yoga, is that it is given as part of a process of following a teacher or a guru, and not this, there's a lot of misconceptions about what that means, but simply what it means is following the teacher's advice and guidance on how to practice these things. And when we do that, that's when we get results. And again, I've seen this over many decades and thousands of Kriya Yogis.
Thank you, Devarshi. How would one learn Kriya Yoga? Can a person just go on the internet and maybe learn it that way through perhaps YouTube or something like that?
That's a good question. And I've seen people try to learn Kriya that way. I suppose you can try to learn it that way, but what we're talking about here is, again, it's a whole way of life. It's a whole approach to life. And the technique of Kriya itself, which really is a relatively small part of it and very important part of it, it's not mechanical in giving results. And I have to say, I've met people who have learned it on the internet, the Kriya technique, and I can't say that I've seen very good results with that. You really need a divine instructor, a guide. This is what the guru is. This is what Yogananda, he was, and he is to those of us who practice Kriya Yoga as part of Ananda Sangha. And a good analogy is that, first of all, the internet makes a very bad guru. I can say that from experience. People get very confused and they just mix and match, and there's a lot of wrong information on the internet. I think we all know this. And I have a friend who's a doctor, and the internet is kind of like what he was taught in medical school, where at the end of medical school, this very wise professor said that, 20 years from now, you're going to discover, and the advancement of medicine is going to discover, that half of what you've learned in these last 4 years is no longer true, and it really wasn't. And the problem is that you don't know which half is true and which half isn't, and you have to use your awareness and intuition and have a wise teacher guiding you even all along the way. And another way of looking at it, which I talk about in the book, is that in America, when you are defending yourself in a court, people mostly just hire a lawyer to defend yourself and prepare the case for the judge or the jury. But in America, you have the right to act as your own attorney or your own lawyer, the person who's being charged. And the lawyers and others say about such people that such a person has a fool for a lawyer, and which is themselves. And that's what it's like when we think that we can be our own guru, because where we're coming from is not from a point of spiritual perception. And so we do need a guide, and we do need a teacher, a guru. And so there's a process of learning Kriya that's really part of a whole body of practice, of techniques, of knowledge, of understanding. And so it's very important to learn Kriya Yoga from a teacher, and just to have someone guiding you. And it doesn't have to be a living guru. Some people say, oh, you need a living master for a guru. And I've seen plenty more than good results from people with Ananda Sangha who Yogananda is our guide and guru, and even he's not living anymore. But we do need a whole set of practices that are given and taught and guided by wiser people than us. And one of the advantages of Ananda Sangha that I've seen is that we have people who have been practicing Kriya as a whole way of life for many decades, who help to guide us and help us to take the steps on the journey and guide, answer questions, show how to put it all together. And then again, we all have to take it home to our own meditation room, to our own life, and integrate these things into our own life. But it's very important. It's more than helpful. It's essential really to have somebody guiding us along the way, and to have a whole set of teachings along with this teacher guiding us through these practices and answering questions. And again, I have to say this, I've seen this from results, that I haven't seen very good results, and I've sometimes seen very negative results from people who think that they can learn Kriya online on their very own, or that they can be their own guru. I tried that before I came to Ananda Sangha. I thought I could be a hermit up in the mountains of California and just be my own teacher. And yeah, I found, like many others, that I had a fool for a guru in the end, and that I needed somebody wiser guiding me in this whole process.
Thank you, Devarshi. Beautiful.